Greetings and Happy New Year to all of you. This is a pre-concert video for a concert in the Victoria Symphony's virtual season. This features the music of two of England's most celebrated composers, Vaughan Williams and Sir Edward Elgar. Now, this is one of two programs we recorded last summer with guest conductor Jean-Marie Zeitouni. This program was recorded at the University of Victoria, and you'll recall the other one, which we aired earlier this season, which featured the music of Mendelssohn. It was recorded at Christ Church Cathedral. So I'll start with Elgar. Here's my favorite photo of Sir Edward for obvious reasons. He was apparently not a very good trombone player. There's a wonderful anecdote that I've told at pre-concert talks before when we've performed his famous Enigma variations. Variation 10 of the Enigma is based on Elgar's friend Dora Penny, and she tells of hearing him try to play the trombone. Quote, on one occasion, he got up and fetched a trombone that was standing in a corner and began trying to play passages in the score. He didn't do very well and often played a note higher or lower than the one he wanted. Speaking as a trombonist, I know exactly how he feels. And as he swore every time that happened, I got into such a state of hysterics that I didn't know what to do. Then he turned to me and said, "How do you expect me to play this dod-gasted thing if you laugh?" I went out of the room as quickly as I could and sat on the stairs, clinging to the banisters till the pain eased, but it was no good. I couldn't stop there as he went on making comic noises, so I went downstairs out of earshot for a bit. I'm very fond of that story. It actually reminds me of the one time I tried to play bagpipes in my house. I'll tell you all about that some other time. I also think we need to bring back the word dod-gasted into regular conversation. So anyway, the Serenade for Strings by Elgar is a work that dates from 1892, and it's about 6 years prior to Elgar's what I'll call big break, which was of course the Enigma variations. Elgar was 35 at the time he wrote this. He was a bit of a late bloomer as far as a composer goes, and the Serenade was one of his first compositions to gain at least some sort of recognition. Elgar was, of course, a violinist. He wrote very well for strings, and later in his life he referred very fondly to this piece. Now, I don't really need to tell you a lot about this work. It's one of those works that immediately endears itself to the listener. That's why they're called serenades. I'll just point out one little detail that I think is quite delightful that you might overlook. And it's right out of the gate, at the very beginning of the piece, in the violas. I've been championing the violas all year. You can hear the rhythm that underpins this beautiful melody that follows. Now, this is one of those things that you might miss on first hearing of the whole piece, but this rhythm comes back in the final movement right before the end of the piece, and it's a really, really nice way to tie the piece together. Yes, I didn't want to spoil the ending there. Okay, so in addition to the Elgar, this program starts with two pieces by Vaughan Williams. And yes, that is how you pronounce his first name. Don't ask me why. Now, anybody that knows me can easily discern why this is my favorite photograph of Vaughan Williams. Vaughan Williams had a very strong influence on English music in the 20th century, and not just from his own compositions. Earlier in his career, he spent a couple of years collecting folk music from all over Britain, just simply going out into the countryside and writing it down as best as he could from listening to people sing it. Now remember, and I've said this a number of times in these lectures, a great deal of music lived for generations, even centuries before someone bothered to write it down, or before technology existed that could capture it. And if you recall last season, when the orchestra performed folk music from Romania collected on those Edison wax cylinders by the Hungarian composer Bela Bartok, well, Vaughan Williams did much the same thing, but without a mechanical recording device. He just used pen and paper. The irony of all that is that once recording and broadcast technology became widespread, music as an oral tradition largely died out. I mean, nowadays, popular songs are recorded and they're associated with individual artists. I've talked about this as well. There's very little music out there that can be considered the real music of the people. So Vaughan Williams really preserved a lot of this English music. We probably wouldn't have a lot of it had he not collected it when he did. Some of that music was adapted with hymn texts, and it was published in a book called The English Hymnal. It was a hymn book for use in the Church of England, and it was published in 1906. Vaughan Williams was its musical editor, and the texts and the content itself were compiled by a clergyman named Percy Dermer. So it's no surprise that Vaughan Williams tapped into the well of English folk song for his own compositions, and our program begins with such a piece. The famous Fantasia on Greensleeves. And Greensleeves, I hope, is a tune that most of you know. Unlike many folk songs, it has a long history in print. It actually first appeared in print in 1580 as what they call a broadsheet ballad. That was like a song of the day printed on a single sheet. Now, they didn't always have musical notation to go along with the words, but Greensleeves made its way into song collections with lute accompaniment in the century right after that. There's even an unsubstantiated legend around Greensleeves that it was written by Henry VIII himself. More on that hymn in just a moment. Now, in Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on Greensleeves, it's paired with another folk song that Vaughan Williams himself collected, and it's called Lovely Joan. Lovely Joan is the tune you hear in the middle section of the piece. The work opens with some pure Vaughan Williams in the form of this beautiful, haunting flute and harp duet. And I need to give a shout out to my colleagues Stephanie Bell, our acting principal flute, and Annabelle Stanley, our principal harpist, for their work on this. The other Vaughan Williams work on this program displays his fondness for another genre. Besides folk music, Vaughan Williams was very interested in the music of Tudor church composers. So these would have been composers writing in the 16th and 17th centuries like Orlando Gibbons, William Byrd, and the subject of the middle piece in our program, the Fantasia on a theme by Thomas Tallis. We only have one likeness of Talus, this one here, that was sketched many years after his death. So we have no idea if this is what he looked like. Talus was a truly astonishing composer. For starters, he lived a long life, 80 years, from 1505 to 1585, and he lived through one of the most tumultuous periods in English history, especially if you made your living in the church, because we all know what happened in 1517, right? Martin Luther made that mother of all Twitter posts and began the Protestant Reformation. Now, we all know how that played out in England, of course, with Henry VIII. Remember, I just mentioned him a little while ago. Somehow, Talus managed to work for not just Henry VIII, but the next three monarchs, finishing his career under Elizabeth I. And he managed to do this while remaining an unreformed Roman Catholic. Now, he accomplished this by probably being very politically savvy, of course, but by being not only an untouchably great composer, but an extremely adaptable one. Here's what I mean. One of the things Protestant reformers disliked was music where you couldn't understand the text. I'll show you an example here. This is an example of what we call polyphony. The voices all enter at different times. And it makes the text a bit muddy in places. Maybe not so much in this example, but in longer, less familiar texts, this was a real issue. So the reformers demanded that music in their church be more like this. And this is the tune which Vaughan Williams used in his Fantasia. It's what we call homophony. And this is what he wrote for the Psalter of Matthew Parker, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1567. If you see in this example, all the voices move on the same text together, which makes the words easier to understand. Now, with a lesser composer, this would make the music rather bland and boring, but not in the case of Talus. He manages to set this text in a very dramatic and a very colorful way, even making the chorus rise to the top of their ranges in the phrases, "The kings arise." I have a little treat for you. As many of you know, I'm privileged to be a chorister at Christ Church Cathedral, and 3 of our choral scholars agreed to join me and record this for you. So here is the tune which captured Vaughan Williams' imagination 340 years later. So that's the theme that inspired Vaughan Williams to set it for a double string orchestra. A big thank you to my colleagues at the Cathedral for doing that, and to the Cathedral itself for recording it for us. Fun fact about the Fantasia, it was first performed in 1910 at a music festival called the Three Choirs Festival. Vaughan Williams himself conducted it, and it was on the same program alongside music of, you guessed it, Sir Edward Elgar, who conducted his own large-scale work, The Dream of Gerontius. So there you are, a program of very beautiful English music, inspired by music for worship, inspired by music of the common people, written in the 20th century, but hearkening back to earlier times. We really enjoyed doing both of these programs last summer and hope you enjoy them too. Until next time.